Happy Thursday, everyone. I'm your host, Chris Carr.
And I am Kristen Johnson.
And this is the Dark Hour Paranormal Podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank
a
you.
little earlier tonight. We had some things scheduled and we thought this time slot would work better. As it turned out, it didn't really matter. But hopefully you're out there watching and listening to us. We got a great show for you guys. We did want to tell you last week, if you were watching our Saturday show, Bigfoot and the Bunny, most likely on the same platform that you're hearing us now. We were talking about going to the Conjuring House. The house on, what is it? Farm on Round Top Road is the official name of it. But it's the Conjuring House that Andrea Perrin grew up in. And I finally got to go and wanted to thank Shannon and MJ again for inviting us to that.
Thank you.
We do have a ton of data. It's been a really bananas week. So we haven't parsed all the data yet to really present stuff on the show, but we did want to tell you there was definitely activity and some pretty interesting stuff, and just talking about the story is pretty good. We had a REM pod with us, like a custom REM pod. It looked like a Ouija planchette.
Yeah, it was really neat.
It was really cool. I think that was Shannon's, and we had it near the stairway, and we were in the bedroom. I guess this was Andrea's bedroom, and that's it. Anne Marie says you're happy you're on earlier. Well, thank you. And good to see you, Anne. And the thing, like I had this trigger object I bring with me to some of the investigations. It's a clown, right? And you see, Kristen's laughing already about the clown, right? And I got this clown story from my childhood.
Yeah, it's just
really messed up. So I bring this clown with me to different investigations as a trigger object, and everybody's kind of like giving me a hard time about the clown because it's like the second time I broke out the clown that night, right? They're like, you're not that effing clown. And I don't know, something like that. Somehow I got the idea that we should play a song, and we played Send in the Clowns by Judy Collins, from like the 70s, Send in the Clowns, that one. And the thing went ballistic, and it tried to sing the song, or at least it appeared to.
Yes.
It was going beep, beep,
it was touching them
after, like, it let us know it liked it. And it was really nuts. And we've MJ's got some awesome footage of this. We're open to cop from him, and as well as some of the other things we did. We did a Estes method. We both did them. Kristen did a Estes method in the living room, or what they call the seance room. And it's the room where Lorraine Warren was thrown. And I think this part was actually in the movie, like one of the few things that actually happened that was in the movie, thrown by, the entity that was haunting them while they were doing a seance. And that was really cool. And I did one in the basement, and that was fun too. That was pretty cool. I went and sat in a corner in the dark with the blindfold and headphones on and everything. Like, I needed the blindfold. I was in the dark, the creepy corner of the basement.
It was really creepy down in that basement the second time we went down.
Absolutely. And these guys were in a different room in the basement, but like further down, like on the other side. And there was a motion detector in between, and it went off like a couple of times on its own, like something was walking back and forth, and it played like an Alfred Hitchcock theme or something. It was really cool. So we'll have stuff for you. It was a lot of fun, and we want to thank those guys. We had so many laughs. MJ, if you hear this, I am haunted by the ghost of Chuck Mangione.
Yes.
So
and all week long I've been singing Clang 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 Goes to Charlie in my head. Charlie.
All
right.
We go. Yeah, a little silly. We got a little silly.
It was fun.
But anyways, I want to tell you about our guest. He's an esoteric researcher of the paranormal, ufology, all cryptids, all kinds of topics. He's the host of Dark Hour Paranormal.
He's also DHP.
Dark Horse Paranormal, right? And we had the privilege of being on his show recently, and he's doing likewise, return the favor and coming on ours. And we're dying to talk to him. So let me bring him on. His name is Michael Roser. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Great, Chris and Kristen. How you doing tonight? Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it is our pleasure.
No, all pleasure's all in this corner. Believe me, I know what you guys do.
Thanks.
How are you doing? What have you been up to, my friend?
Fantastic, mate. Had to take a little time off of the show recently because of the big C. That's still going about. But within that time I had off, I was able to plan and kind of schedule things out a little bit further than perhaps I would normally be able to. Of course, still working very heavily with Third Phase of Moon behind the scenes, along with Goof on as well. So staying pretty tight knit. And of course, there's a lot going on brewing, if you will, that we'll see percolate within the next few months here. These ideas that we've been kind of wrestling with in certain terms.
Nice.
Awesome.
And Third Phase is a huge show. It's
Oh,
been
yeah.
around a long time, and we've seen Goof On too. Quite fun.
Yes.
And it's a hell of an acronym.
Oh God, yes.
Good. He's
Yeah,
good. I like the show. It's fun.
And no, we love Dark Hour and been catching up on
Yep.
some episodes since we've been on and gotten to meet you. What
Thank
got
you.
you into this stuff? Did you have like a childhood paranormal experience, or what was the motive?
You know, many people go down different paths when they start to find interest within these fields, and more often than not, it's something personal. It could be something experiential, or it could be something in the way of research. For me, it was sort of all three of those elements put together. I think by the time I was, I'd say 7 or 8 years old, I was aware that I could see certain, what I'd identify as energy now, or I could see shadows, or I could see full-on apparitions. As a child, you don't have the same filter that, we grow up with and cultivate through taking on somebody else's perception of the world. So I was much freer to see some of this anomalous activity and yet had no identity for it. Only when I got, much older and started to really traverse some of these avenues within the field did I start to kind of understand what it is that I may have been experiencing. So, for me, it always had a fascination. I mean, I loved unsolved mysteries. Robert Stack was definitely a mentor in way of, the way he's working his voice, as much as Art Bell was back in those days too. I found him in the early 90s. So the interest became much more intense, I'll say, as I got to about 11, 12 years old, coming into that maturity. It was literally around 13 years old that I started to work with hands-on healing energy. At the time, we didn't really use any sort of moniker outside of that description. Today we know it very readily as Reiki or some of these other modalities that people understudy. But for me, it was more of something of play. So I had my first reading when I was 12, and the reason that the clairvoyant had agreed to do that at such a young age is that she felt intuitively this is something that would very much benefit me in respect to my spiritual path. So I was incredibly open-minded. I had already had my own intuitions. In fact, I had asked Spirit or God at that time, if you will. I said, what's the purpose of life? And actually, I think it's what was the meaning of life was exactly what I asked. And it's something that I meditated on to the limited ability I was able to at that time. And prior to this reading, I actually heard something that wasn't my voice come in and say, the meaning of life is to be. And I thought that was profound at the time. I couldn't really wrap my head exactly what that meant, but as time went on and I had expressed this to people, I've come to learn this is about being in the moment. It doesn't really matter what you're doing. The soul itself is benign, and therefore it just seeks the experience. That particular theory alone would explain why there are so many different variations within the spectrum of human experience, some very not preferred and others that are, something that people would dream of in way of comfortability. This again would sort of encompass that if this is in fact the case. But that's where I started, having that reading and then going forward, my mother being a spearhead and allowing me to explore this based on her own experiences and knowledge. And then I was taken under the wing of a woman named Joyce Orcutt, who was based out of Connecticut and was a very big time healer and clairvoyant for that era. Literally took me under her wing, and I was good friends with her all the way up until she passed in 2012 or 13, I think it was. But that's pretty much where it began for me.
Wow. Oh, that's very interesting. And I think it's fascinating. We asked most of the guests that come on the show if they had childhood experiences, be they seeing spirits, apparitions, or aliens and UFOs and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And most of them have. And I think it's an interesting statistic. I mean, it's almost all of them. Now, there's some notable exceptions. We had Lloyd Auerbach on, for instance, right? He's a pretty famous parapsychologist. He didn't, and a few people haven't. But I'm telling you, it's like 98% have had something. And I think it's a driving factor and later in life, like either you're trying to put together maybe what those experiences were about or validate them in some way, or just kind of seek them out to have that experience again.
Well, it's curious that you mentioned this too, because I was recently speaking to one of the panel members from Third Phase, and I was saying, there are a lot of people who do come on the show who have been longtime researchers and have never had an experience. As informational as these people can be, and whatever they have in their archives they can put forward for us to be objective about, they still haven't had a first-hand experience or brush with what they study. Those who have, I find to be very introspective when it comes to approaching some of this material. And, at the very end of the day, while, having a researcher who has done all of this legwork, leading up to, perhaps allowing us to make our own conclusions based on that knowledge database, if you will, the experiencer has a conviction far beyond what the researcher carries. And I always find that dynamic to be very curious. And going forward, of course, I'd like to see what else kind of turns up out of that dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Having the experience carries a lot more weight than just studying it, of course. In fact, it's hard to explain, and you sometimes fumble for words, or you just don't. You feel like a little insecure trying to like tell people like this really crazy thing happened to me.
Oh yeah,
and it sounds bananas, and it, and you see it in their face, like yeah, okay. But when it happens to you and you're that person, and on the other side, and you go, wow, okay, there's nothing in me that can explain what just happened.
And then you have those who experience it again and again and again. Maybe for somebody who has only a one-off, they can kind of erase that and say, yeah, it was just a one-off. The stars aligned at a certain time, the wind was blowing in the right direction. It's all coincidence, right? But what they don't understand is that if you go deeper into this, you will find within the chaos and entropy that is the universe, you will find that there is synchronicity. And perhaps that's what we've been calling as a misnomer all of this time, a coincidence.
Exactly. Chris and I say the same thing. We call it synchronicity instead. I know Anne-Marie Young, who's in our one of our viewers right now, she too as well. It's definitely synchronicity.
Yeah, absolutely. Synchronicity absolutely plays a role in these things, and it's a hard thing to explain, but everybody experiences it.
Well, it's a higher interpretation of what we've already tried to explain without having certain sets of understanding. If you say something's coincidence, you simply don't understand the inner working. So this is the best of your effort that you can put forth. There are many examples that we can say within our experience here that doesn't encompass the collective. But once you start walking around, keeping in mind that we are all connected and that there is something at play within that, you start realizing that synchronicity is what's always been there. It's just a matter of people being able to kind of anchor that in for themselves and recognize it, because it's hard to accept that there might be some sort of pattern or some sort of organization beyond what we know as our own control. But yet, again, there seems to be just that.
Most definitely.
Our friend Steve Auclair says sometimes everything just comes together. And it certainly does. It's a peculiar thing. Now, do you think this Liz, you mentioned the collective, are you a fan of the collective unconscious?
How are you, in what context are you using it?
Yeah, well, for example, we could talk about tulpas, egregores, things that people believe in exist and actually take on a life of their own. So, yes, in the conscious realm.
Yes, absolutely. I think that if you want to step back for just a moment and look at things in a more entire sense, we are much larger and multifaceted than we ever could imagine. Just because my consciousness is within this body right now, within this point in time, and we're speaking linearly, of course, because that's basically how our mind is programmed to work, and that's actually a safeguard against the all that's always present. We live and exist in multi dimensions, based and separated by frequencies, if you wanted to look at it that way. So for us to be aware of all of those different parts of ourselves, again, would be very overwhelming. You go into the shamanic traditions and you talk about rescuing parts of yourself that have been lost within certain trauma. I often cite that movie of What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams, because I think they touched upon something that is actually based in a loose fact. I'll put it that way, because the experience is always there, but you actually have to go and retrieve a part of yourself that you will find, and maybe when you see it, that you don't recognize it, but it is part of you. You give that love to that part, and it rejoins you. So yes, kind of coming back to what you're talking about as a collective unconscious, whatever we're giving energy to in the waking state, we may see manifest quicker or more subtly, depending on the intensity with which we approach it. But at the very end of the day, every single thought that you have manifests somewhere on some level and affects every single living entity within this paradigm.
In like a parallel type universe type thing. I like how you said the all, like, you're right. I don't think our brains, our physical brains, could handle all that information, like all possibilities. Being in the here and now is hard enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let alone the past, the future, everything, and every possible decision and outcome of those decisions, of yourself and everybody around you in your environment, just streaming in at one time. I think it would burn.
It would be a cacophony. Could you imagine?
Right. It would be really, really tough. But I think you're definitely onto something. I agree. I've thought about this with like string theory, and when you get into like timelines on how they can split, and the higher the dimension you go, the more variables you get and abilities to go back to different times, and how that may play into the paranormal. A very fascinating thing. Samantha Baker says aliens are very real in my body and soul and spirit and feeling. Yeah, I believe that. People are having experiences. Do you think that more people are having experiences, or it's like people like to say the veil is thinning, or that sort of thing? Or do you think there's just more media and outlets for people to share this information?
To go back to our word synergistic, I think there's a correlation that's happening here simultaneously. So we are seeing an uptick in people's awareness of these matters, and perhaps other beings that may or may not be with us. And yet at the same time, one begets the other. We're going to be highlighting that in a very physical samsara sense within our media, on that topical surface that people are just kind of catching outside of distraction, but it's always present. Now, I do believe that people have been experiencing these things for millennia, or perhaps all right, all time. But it's just getting more attention now, and there's less concern of prosecution or certain ridicule, reprisal as we move forward, and this becomes something more mainstream to talk about. That's a very important note to kind of look at right now. I mean, what I do, what Rich does, what Blake and Brent does with Third Phase of Moon, Dr. J Radio Live, Apollo Stereo, you name all these people that are out there, Michael Schratt, Preston Dennett, all these fantastic folks that are working within this field. What we're doing right now is the intrinsic nature of what we're actually here to do, whether these people will agree with you on that verbiage or not. We're planting a seed for what comes next. Literally right now, we've discovered the pot, and we have the seeds in hand. There's only a handful of us, and by that I mean a group of us within this that have the real passion to bring this out. We're not concerned with what tomorrow brings, whether it's the smoking gun evidence or it be something more anecdotal. We know, and we are observing, that we are a part of this. I mean, you as well. I mean, I'm including everybody in this. We're all, with our inquisitiveness and our curiosity, we are planting a seed for what comes next based on the work that we're doing. We're certainly just the first step or two within the ladder. We're coming off of a generation that had really built the foundation. Whitley Strieber, Stanton Friedman, I think, if I'm saying the name correct here. If I'm not, please correct me. But all these names that, have unfortunately within the past 10, 15 years passed on into the ethers, we're left with that work. We're picking up the torch, all of us, every single one of us, to carry that on and again, plant a seed for the next generation, because this is something that will take time to unfold. We can't just divulge to the world, yes, they're extraterrestrials here. Here's how they work. Here are the species. Here are the people who've had those experiences, as visceral and tangible as they actually may be. People have to have a buffer in respect to time to anchor this within themselves and allow themselves to shift. Now, the curious thing is that one of the biggest strengths we hold as a species is the strength of malleability. We can adapt like nobody's business, and we have done it in so many different cases. But we still have that process to get there, because we still oppose change, which is a grand dichotomy, really, in my eyes. But yet, that's exactly what we're dealing with.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I mean, the times are changing. People are more open to new ideas or different ideas, sometimes too much so, it would seem, in my opinion. But you're right. There is certainly more acceptance to something that, as you like to use the word, esoteric, right? And there was, say, 20 or especially like 40 years ago, you could be labeled a nut pretty easily,
That's exactly what Anne-Marie Young just said.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yes. I mean, even 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, I mean, you might have to hide this information. And if you recall, doing that type of research back in the day required you to either A, know somebody, okay, who had the information you could physically go and look at, or B, you had to go to a library and hope for the best. Whatever wasn't censored already might be in the archives, but you had to do a lot of legwork, and it was not easy to get access to any cases that were outside of what was being televised on shows like Unsolved Mysteries.
Sure, absolutely. In Search Of was a pretty out there show for its time. Yeah, I loved it. Growing up.
Loved Arthur C. Clarke as well. I mean, good Lord, there were a handful of them.
Yeah, there were, but it was definitely on the outside. Not that it's totally acceptable, but there's certainly a greater level of acceptance. Courtney says, I think we are more intuitive than we think. I also believe maybe we Black sort of speak that our minds can't handle or comprehend it. So yeah, I think we are. I think we all have these kind of innate abilities, and they're coming to fruition eventually. I see a real UFO alien here in England, Great Britain, UK. Thank you, Samantha. So lots of sightings out there, a lot more things being reported. Certainly the government with its various formations of groups, so, some real, some seemingly not so real, are slowly disclosing some information. I think they're using some pretty poor examples in front of Congress.
Yes.
But, they certainly have better ones.
Yeah,
those hearings were a joke. In fact, I was embarrassed for our UAP task force who didn't seem to know about some of the most prominent cases in ufology. I mean, how could they be sitting there being asked the question? You folks are the ones supposed to be taking up this work and be the experts in the field. And I use that term loosely, by the way. Okay. But they're supposed to know about this. I just don't believe that they were being transparent. And I have a huge problem with that. But, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, they're definitely not being transparent. In fact, they're purposely, trying to throw people, like, I don't know, down the wrong path. So the examples they used before Congress, the film footage, like, we know they have like way better stuff than a Mylar balloon.
Right.
It was right in the hearing. It was right in the hearing. One of the gentlemen asked him a question, and I can't remember what it was off the top of my head, but nonetheless, he asked a question, and UAP spokesperson at that moment had said, "Hey, let's talk about that behind closed doors." No. This is supposed to be transparent. We need to talk behind closed doors, right?
Yeah.
So
when they talked about submersibles, and it went right to that.
Yes.
Come on, the thing you want to hear about,
Yeah.
USOs, right? We'll talk about that later when nobody else is listening.
Yeah, when the world can hear.
Fantastic. Thank you, guys.
When the clubhouse door is closed.
That's right.
Meet me at Bohemian Grove.
There you go.
You're right. Now, do you see a tie into, say, paranormal phenomena, that being that more of a spiritual nature, what we call ghosts and entities of different types, and ufology?
There is a correlation there. I don't think it's as stark as some people may believe. I think that probably 85, 90% of what we see in our skies is something back engineered from a certain reconnaissance. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's all from off-world, but certainly some of it is. We can witness this within the metapropulsion that obviously is there within the mechanics somehow. We can't see any propellers, we can't see any tails, we can't see any wings, and yet this thing is stationary in flight and can make 90-degree angles or any other obtuse shape and way of a certain path that would be absolutely impossible with our conventional craft. When we look at something that is actually extraterrestrial or perhaps off-world in the respect that we would call it by that description, I've been told through certain means that if this is a different species, if we see the craft, it's a mistake. Either it's an operation mistake or it might be a mechanical mistake, which really intrigues me, considering many people who've been aboard these craft have mentioned that there is an organic or biological aspect to some of these craft, which again would make sense based on how these beings are purportedly flying them, sitting together collectively, going into a different space, a different vibration, and actually, managing the craft from that aspect. They don't have a steering wheel. There's no blinky board to hit, buttons on. There's no levers and stuff. Unless, again, in my opinion, it's something that we have already back engineered. This is something we're familiar with in way of flight, or just using the mechanics behind, whatever the method is. Bringing it into the world of the paranormal, I think there's a correlation, as I mentioned, but I do believe that there is a separation, because what we're looking at are different layers of the overtones. Okay, so you look at the third dimension. If you equate this to music, you can say it has 12 smaller or sub overtones that go within this reality. Now, the subset may be some sort of matrix. Okay, think about in way of math, right? So it's going to hold up a certain set of frequencies outside of this, which it naturally would go beyond. Up, down, left, right, however you want to look at it, you're going to have a completely different experience. And each one of these dimensions, if you will, are separated by a 90-degree angle. Now, that's something curious to think about when you're watching these things flitter about the sky. If you see something moving in perhaps a snake-like fashion and stop and then do one of these numbers and disappear, it's been said that that is actually a point where you're witnessing this move into one of those overtones. Now, it could be something as easy as cloaking, right? So we talk about Bigfoot, we talk about Dogman, some of these other creatures that seem to roam around the woods. And though they have a physical being that we can quantify in certain respects, at least by visibility, we can see that there are footprints. People have said they found scat, there's fur. They're also incredibly intangible and very easy to slip away. So how does that tend to happen? I mean, of course, we've all heard the theory that perhaps they have a multidimensional aspect about them built in within their biology. I think we also do. I think that in the very end, when we sit back, and there may have been a point where we were parallel with some of these beings in way of evolution and development, but at some point we diverged, and they did as well. Perhaps they went on a more right-brained interpretation of the world. They didn't undertake the industrial end or the mechanical end as we did. We became very left-brained and stayed in that logical pocket. Therefore, our minds, our bodies, our perceptions of the world, the way that we've created it, sat within that realm of a left-brained interpretation. Perhaps, again, this is just something I've thought about many times. Someone like Bigfoot has gone off and stayed within that intuitive realm. So instead of making machines that push them through time and into other dimensions the way that we've done, they can do it through their own meditative purposes. For all intents and purposes, with that being said, you can look at the Eastern traditions and you can find some of these covens and monks that have been working with certain meditation, and they are defying all laws of Newtonian physics. Opening us up to another branch that even goes beyond what we understand for quantum physics. I mean, these modalities don't have names, and yet we are still observing the effect. So just to, again, answer your question, yes, I think there's a correlation, but at the same time, we do still have to separate them in certain respects, because while extraterrestrials may traverse through some of those fields, we've heard of them, Greys hanging out with shadow people, seen together, even with different cryptids, we've seen them together. I think that they're just using it as a highway. I don't think that they will exist in those spaces the way that perhaps shadow people or people who have passed on and haven't reached another overtone actually spend time there.
I love that.
Yeah, it's good. It makes a lot of sense. I think maybe people, when they do pass on into the ether in spirit, may become more dimensional and more like them, and more likely to cross paths, especially when we talk about these places that are like portal areas. We mentioned the Conjuring House at the front of the show, having gone there, and the Freetown Forest is another one that's pretty notorious in our area, right? Where you get phenomena of the cryptids, of UFOs, of ghosts and hauntings and puckwudgies and other entities, right?
Well, there are these areas that are much thinner in respect to whatever energy is there. I mean, we call them, we have such a very limited language for what these places are: portals, vortexes. I mean, we call them what we possibly can. I mean, I've walked through the Freetown State Forest. I've been to other places that hold the same anomaly, and they all have a very particular feeling. Maybe it's not similar from one place to another, but you're standing in a spot that is much different than anything else you've experienced. And
Yes.
if you're Native Americans or indigenous people of whatever culture aware of this at any point in their time that they existed, I guarantee that they were working right alongside with that. Now, when I spoke with the Bridgewater Triangle paranormal investigators and we went out and we shot the Bridgewater Triangle documentary, apparently they really enjoyed something that I had in respect to why some of these places become tainted. And, the Hockomock Swamp is a very good example of a very sacred place that houses both spirits. Okay. What's preferred and what's not preferred, at least in our, our language. And yet, the Native Americans of that time, the Algonquins, the Wampanoag tribe, they were able to commune with both of those energies. And it was a very allied connection and relationship that they shared. So what ended up happening when the settlers came and everything unfolded, there was a lot of war and bloodshed. This actually was soaked up not only just by the land but energetically, and the way that I saw it was a very pure what would look like a vortex or some sort of whirlpool of white energy that extended through the earth, actually, the way that I see it. And you'll just have the funnel coming out one end, again, to make this simple. And when you drop that blood in there, it's going to color the rest of that energy. So what you feel today is literally just this spiral of that negative energy that's being amplified by that particular portal because of how sacred the place was, or is, I should say.
That makes
Yeah,
sense.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And when you talk about those whirlpools, it reminds me a bit of ley lines. As far as the energy goes, we definitely felt that. I think, if anything, at the Conjuring place, that there is something about those lands, especially walking in the back. It's on beautiful grounds. It just had an energy about it that was different. And it's only 20 minutes from where we are right now. Walking in the woods felt totally different there, and through the grounds and the house itself, than it does here. And it was weird, and it was noticeable.
Unmistakable.
Yes, very much.
Some comments out there. I see Joshua Dixon. Hey, glad to see you're out of Facebook jail, buddy.
Yeah, it's troublemaker.
He says, I do believe passed on humans can communicate with passed on aliens. I know it sounds weird, but actually maybe we all coexist in death as we coexist in life. I suppose that is possible.
I like that. And as time goes on, I'm starting to wonder if most of these species that hold that Christ consciousness energy or something that's even higher. I mean, we can talk about the Palladians, we can talk about the Syrians, we can talk about those who come from Andromeda. There are so many who have kind of come in as that parent, mentor, helping hand, in certain times within our history. You have to wonder if they have gotten to a certain point in their evolution where they choose when they pass on. If they haven't superseded death the way that we understand it. I think death is actually sort of a sub effect of our own consciousness level. I think as we raise in our consciousness level collectively, we can eventually abandon physical death. I don't think it's actually natural. It's just what we know within the time that we've had here in recorded history. Prior to recorded history, I mean, everything was fair game. You talk about Atlantis, you talk about Lemuria. They had healing temples that supposedly beings from all over the immediate universe in all different dimensions used to come to sit in and heal. These temples still exist, but they're in a much higher vibrational state, and people do access them through certain meditations and astral projection. But that being said, even though there was a physical component to Atlantis as well as an etheric component, something that we wouldn't be able to find here today in that stark contrast. Okay, we can feel it walking into these spaces. It's more of an implication than it is definitive. But for those people, or I should just say beings of that time, that was what reality was. It wasn't as anchored and solid as what we know today.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's pretty cool. I see Cashew Gesundheit.
Hey, Cashew.
who I remember from being on the Dark Hour Paranormal show.
My left arm and my right brain. How you doing?
Hey,
She is
guys,
the most fantastic moderator on YouTube, hands down, bar none, the best.
awesome.
That's awesome here.
So lots of comments out there, lots of things being
Joshua
said.
Dixon had one back to the aliens. But why does NASA
Yep,
continue?
He does. He says, why does NASA continue to cut live feeds if something pops up on a live, but has recently released footage of UFO or UAF, USO, and admitted that it's not of this world? So why do they continue to cut or delete photographs, I guess is a question, or alter the live feeds when our government is saying these things exist?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you why. Because what are you going to do about it? Okay. They're still at a point where they can say what they want. They can do what they want. They can be as brazen as they want. And, we just have to kind of sit back and accept it. We'll tear it apart and we'll make noise. We'll give a very boisterous voice to this. But at the end of the day, they're still sort of out of reach as an entity, even though they're supposed to be working for the American public at the very least. I feel it's probably the last thing that they're doing. And yet, you have to understand NASA's history too. I mean, they've been covering things up for a very long time. We've caught them doing this. Talking to Richard Hoagland, will really open your eyes in respect to the augmented photographs. There was a fantastic book that he put out some time ago. I think it was called The Dark Side of the Moon, and this really goes over in detail what NASA has given us versus those who had the original copies and were able to pull out what was actually within the photographs. And then we see the photoshopped versions of these. We see the smudged lines, the blurred areas, the pixelated spots that were rearranged. And you have to say, well, this is a lot of effort to go through all of these photographs. I mean, because they've taken hundreds of thousands over, so many years.
Probably millions.
People have to go through these with a fine-tooth comb. And again, they're out there hiding something, but I feel like they're following some other protocol that's coming from a higher authority. I'll put it that way. But that being said, times are changing, and as the public, we are attempting to hold these type of organizations much more responsible for what they're putting out, because they are acting as our voice in certain respects, and there are many of us who are not pleased with what they're saying.
Yeah. It is a long history. As far as I know, it started in the buildup to the moon, to getting to the moon in the 60s. Prior to actually landing there, we sent lots of satellites and things of that, probes and things, to take those photographs. And there's just, like you said, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of these photographs. And some, of course, are if you don't know, but our audience may not, are posted on various NASA sites. And I've seen examples myself. I've had examples sent to me that was on like a nasa.gov site, opened it, was able to open it, look at it, examine it, go, wow, that is pretty cool. Check it a week later and it's no longer there. Yeah, that sort of thing, and bookmark them and stuff. So that is very real. And it's a good point, Joshua. Thank you for bringing that up. Same
thing with Dr. Michael Lynch. He had sent us something of the sun. We went to go pull it up and it was gone.
Yeah.
They pulled the feed.
Yeah, some of the sun photos. Interesting. And he's like,
pulled the photo.
Well, we've seen footage of independent footage of objects coming into the sun and then coming out the other side with the plume following close behind. So it's very obvious that whatever the object was did not pass in front or behind. It actually entered the sun. Now, people put forth certain theories as to why this may be. If it's an extraterrestrial craft, perhaps they're getting into this star to recharge, or there's something in respect to the cleansing of the craft energetically. I mean, we really just don't know how any material can get through that type of heat and come out the other end the way that it has been. So again, this isn't just one video. There are countless videos out there of objects again entering the sun and leaving the sun. What's going on in the middle that we're just not privy to? I mean, are we misinterpreting this? I mean, many people will tell you that the moon is hollow, and we have reasons to believe that. If I don't need to reiterate them here, but long story short, since we first landed on the moon with Apollo 11 there, officially, this has been observed. In the same breath of the word, if you come back and you look at the four, I think it was 3 astronauts that had really embarked on that mission in the debriefing, they all look so forlorn, almost as if the earth has fallen out from underneath them. And they're very cut and dry with their answers. They don't look excited. I mean, if I was the first person to ever step foot on the moon, I mean, that would be something I'd wear on my shoulder with such pride, and I'd be so excited to be that person and be able to share this with people. But you
Sure.
look at these guys and they just don't share that enthusiasm, and people say it's because when they got there, they were greeted by something else that told them to leave. So
There's some kind of a 2-minute clip of, I don't know if it was Buzz Aldrin, somebody that they said, look up there above the crater. There's something looking down, or someone's looking down at us. I forgot the whole story, but it's something like that.
yes,
Yeah.
there's also, I think that's a 12-minute cut within that feed, and people speculate that they were working on some sort of Freemason level, doing some sort of ritual before they actually landed on the moon. This has been corroborated by quite a few different sources. So, again, with that in mind, obviously there are some secrets that we're not allowed to know, but in respect to what they ended up finding there, clearly, I mean, they did get to the surface of the moon. I believe that there's a good chance that some of that we see in that footage is actually of the moon, and some of it may have been recorded in post-production somehow. I think that wasn't necessarily anything nefarious. I think it might have had to do just with production for the time. But
yes.
yeah, that being said, I think we definitely did get there. And if you look at Buzz Aldrin's artwork, a lot of it is prismatic and incredibly colorful. And somebody had asked him at one point, said, why are you, painting these pictures of the surface of the moon and its atmosphere with such vibrant rainbow colors? And he said, because that's what it looks like. And, again, going back to what Richard Hoagland has researched, there are many particles of glass, smashed glass, that are kind of floating in that atmosphere that when the light comes through, apparently has some sort of prismatic effect. I've never been to the moon myself, so I can't substantiate that, but it is very curious, given, looking at all these theories, that are certainly peripheral in respect to each other, but all of a sudden sort of snake back together and intertwine. And we're now looking at perhaps a reality that, once again, we just didn't expect to see.
Yeah. The history of the moon itself, its creation, it has changed in our lifetimes.
Mhm.
I think several times, and it's only theoretical as to what they think it actually is and what it composed of, how it came to be. We know that it's the only moon, like in our solar system, that has an almost perfect circle orbit around the planet. Almost all moons have a sort of an oval,
Yes.
sort of elliptical shapes, but ours is perfectly to like a foot or something.
Yes.
Goes around the earth in a circular fashion, makes a perfect circle. And that's fascinating because our world itself is so heavily influenced by the moon's gravitational pull, with the oceans and the effect of things like valves and river and waterways, and even our bodies are affected by the moon. And food, food chain is certainly affected by it. It's interesting.
The Aboriginals will tell you that there was a time when the moon wasn't in the sky. We're going back many, many, many years now. It's within their tradition, but they have a story of the time when there was no moon. So what does that mean? Perhaps this is something artificial placed in there. I mean, the math that surrounds the moon, you're mentioning it very topically here, is incredibly curious. Within all of this chaos that's within the universe, this improbability, all of a sudden you have a smaller body, celestial body, that really, without that celestial body, the Earth would just not be the same and probably wouldn't be able to sustain certain life. But then again, you have a time when apparently this wasn't there in the sky within our tidal lock. So I find that curious, and hopefully as time goes on, we'll be able to understand whether that was true or not, and if it is, what the implications behind that story really holds.
Sure. Some interesting comments out here I want to bring up. Samantha says, yet the moon was part of the earth in the first place, they say. Well, I think that theory has changed, and they think the moon was mostly created by another planet crashing into the earth. That might be today's theory, but I think it changes, periodically. I know some of the soil samples, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, are much older than the earth's soil. So that's an interesting thing.
Yeah.
How that could even be, if you consider the Big Bang, I'm not sure, but I have read that. Mason Callahan says the earth is hollow. I believe other worlds are the same as the earth being hollow. And then goes on to say, much love from MJC Paranormal on YouTube.
Awesome.
Right on, right back at you. And then goes on to say the moon was created and moved in its place. It is a super base and has been for thousands of years. Now, how do you feel
actually,
Michael?
Yeah, I err on the side of that. Honestly, I do. It would be the perfect place to have some sort of base. And, you know, from my understanding, it is possible that at one point many different societies and cultures and species were using the moon sort of as a jump off point or a gas station, if you will, rest stop. You know, whatever evidence of that, you know, being the case, you know, is probably hard to retrieve today, given the fact that, you know, only certain people are allowed to either A, go to the moon, and even in that, they can't stay for very long. And B, of course, we've spoken about, you know, different privatized organizations that are taking observations of that planet. And yeah, it's just, it's hard for us to really ascertain how true that type of history would be. But again, it does seem to fit in some sort of logic.
Oh, what are they doing up there? Playing Farmville?
Hey, you know, your guess is as good as mine, my friend.
Watching the colonies grow, you know,
Mining.
for future mining expeditions.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's where Bitcoin came from, right?
Yeah, right.
That's great.
I wish it would come back a little bit. I've got some Dogecoin. I'm taking a beating. They need to start spending some of that Doge.
Yes.
Anyways, if you had to quantify one event in your life, one, whether it be a paranormal, ufology, we'll call it esoteric, could be any of those, that was the most profound experience, what would that be?
I would say, yes, I have many that I could refer to, but there was one specifically that I was not prepared for. It was more visceral than anything I'd experienced before. And this is when a coworker and I'd call him a friend of mine passed away in, I think, 2019. Now, what ended up happening was I got a call. It was on Saturday morning, and this was from another coworker, and I was very good friends with her, and she knew that, you know, I was clairvoyant and all this stuff, but she never knew what that meant. You know, I've talked to her about empathetic reactions and so forth. It's all sitting in the realm of certain conjecture for her. So she calls me on the phone, and I walk into a separate room of the house, and I start speaking to her, and she divulges that, you know, this person had passed away. And as I'm talking to her, out of the corner of my eye, I see this large white oval. It's light, but it's translucent. I'm seeing the overlay, but it's in the same space. And on the bottom, there's this deep red ochre. It was a gorgeous red, but it kind of went into a pink as it went up into the rest of the white light. And as I saw it, I felt it stronger than I saw it, and it was him. And it started moving towards me. As it moved towards me, inch by inch, I just started breaking down. I had a very empathetic response to it. Literally could not catch myself. And, you know, the person on the other line saying, "Are you okay?" I'm like, "Yes, I'm fine. This isn't my emotion." And she's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "He's here right now. I'm feeling him." And she's like, "Huh?" I said, "Well, this is what I've always explained to you, but I've never obviously shown you." And sure enough, I asked him, I said, "Listen, this is too intense." You know, he obviously wanted to talk. I said, "Can you just back away until I'm done with the phone call? I'll let you know." And it was like that, turning on a light switch, or turning it off, I should say, wiping the tears out of my eyes. I was completely fine, baseline, no thoughts whatsoever. And even the person I was speaking to had found that quite odd. She said, "Well, I mean, you just turned it off." I said, "Well, it wasn't mine in the first place." So I ended up talking to her for about another 20 minutes to half hour. And at that point, got off the phone and walked back into my bedroom. And sure enough, as soon as I walked into the bedroom, out of the right eastern corner came that energy, but much slower this time. And it was asking, "Is it okay? Can I talk to you now?" Being very gentle, realizing, I guess, the impact that had made, kind of coming in the way it did. And I said, "Yes, you know, come talk to me, and we'll have a conversation." And sure enough, it did. Came right up to me. And my energy connected with that energy. It wasn't anything I did consciously. It was just, we were in one energetic field. Now, what I saw was that he had his left foot, in a stream, yay wide, maybe like 3 or 4 feet wide. Okay, it was a very shallow stream, but this stream was light. It was liquid light, and it just scintillated and sparkled like nothing I'd ever seen in a physical sense before. I could see this in my mind's eye. And he was there very nervous to put the other foot in because he had a child that was left behind. He had family and friends that he felt such melancholy and sorrow about what had happened. He didn't feel like he was done. And I talked to him as I'm talking to you right now. I spoke to him for, I'd say, if I were to guess, maybe 15, 20 minutes. I'm not really sure because time sort of stopped. There was no concept of that time. And at the very end of it, I said, listen, this is the path. There's no going back at this point. You have to move forward. That is the only thing you can do. And very slowly, he kind of shifted his body weight and he put that other foot into the stream and literally just disappeared. Yeah, just from toe all the way up to the head, just disappeared. And the stream, I could still see the stream there for just a moment after it retained until that disappeared too. As this unfolded within the course of, oh God, I don't know, maybe 10 seconds, excuse me, what ended up happening was the room had filled with a certain pressure. And as soon as he left, poof, all dropped. It was like being in a completely different space.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Jeepers.
That is profound.
So, I mean, that's the clearest that I've ever seen one of those higher vibrational energies come in. He was obviously in transition. And this isn't the first time, somebody like that has come to me. In fact, I recently found out one of the kids I grew up with had passed away in a motorcycle accident about a year ago. And that very day I was thinking of him driving out to work, and sure enough, boom, right in. I mean, he was on top of me, every hair on my body sticking straight up. I could feel the energy rising like this, like rising from underneath me. If I don't feel that, there's something else there. It's very specific in how you feel these energies. There's a signature that's attached to them. So when he came through, I always saw his face at that moment that he came through, and he began to talk to me. We had a conversation, and he was very happy where he was. He was accepting where he was. But again, the whole idea is that you can have these visceral experiences and be connected with spirit, knowing that those who pass from this reality, they're not gone. They're not gone. And in some cases, they're more reachable than perhaps they were in real life.
Right.
Yeah. I noticed you said you were thinking of him, right? It's like the thought is the weekend.
As soon as you think of it, it comes right in. Yep.
And that makes the connection. Now
it doesn't always happen because it's up to what they're doing too. So
sure. Otherwise it would be a really confusing world. But I think it's definitely key to it. And I think there's a certain energy in thought.
Yes.
If you're focused on a particular event, person, entity, whatever, what have you, you definitely draw it toward you.
Intent.
That intent
thought is the precursor to manifestation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nothing more powerful right now that we have in way of tools.
Would you describe yourself as a clairvoyant? You mentioned seeing in your mind's eye and seeing apparitions. Is that a suitable label? And I know labels can get a little funny. Are you into the clairs and hearing and seeing?
I just encompass all of that under the umbrella of clairvoyance. We don't have a lot of words, and some of them are loaded. But we do the best we can for whatever description we can put forward. I mean, these experiences of connection, again, are something that goes beyond the duality that most people live in every day and experience that separation. Duality is the best way to describe it. But we transcend that duality when we have these experiences, but it reinforces and strengthens not a belief, but a knowledge, an experience within that, so that when you see it again, you recognize it, becomes familiar, it becomes part of your everyday. If I wanted to, I could walk around open and have spirit come in all day. That's kind of how I sort of figured out where I needed to draw certain boundaries, because that was what was happening. The most inopportune times, and use your imagination, these beings would come in. Hey, I want to talk to you. I'm like, that's great. Can you leave a message? I'll get back. Put it on the board over there. I'm busy. You can see that, So, you know it.
Ghost Stop doesn't sell the ghost answering machine for that. But that's where do you have a way of way of shutting it down. I know people who are heavily, in contact, like you said, it becomes a burden.
Yes.
Turning it off
Yes.
is harder than turning it on, if you will.
It's something that is definitely individual. There are techniques that you can try to see what works best for you. Excuse me. Personally, I'm at a point where if something's facing me, I can literally turn that right angle and shift into something different, and I can leave that conversation, that reality altogether, so that it's not going to affect what I'm doing here in a linear sense. We are the ones who are driving, as much as it may seem that the stimulus comes from outside of ourselves. I think that that's probably further from the truth than we realize. A lot of what we have in respect to experience, we give permission, regardless of what the experience is, we give permission for that to happen to us. So in that same breath of the word, we also have the control to say we are going to create and guide our own experience and not allow things to happen to us. We're going to make sure that we are the ones who are creating it. We are creators. Again, going back to the whole idea of the all and spirit, the way I look at it is like this. You have an apple. The apple represents God, spirit, the whole, the universe, whatever. At one point, the apple knew itself as an apple, but said, well, I don't have the experience of, being an apple. I just know I'm an apple. So it cuts a piece of itself off to look back on itself. When it does that, it says, you're an apple, but I'm also still an apple. I'm just a piece of that apple. And we go down that path and understanding how separation is an absolute illusion, considering that we are the creator, the same way the universe is, something that creates alongside with us. We just, as human beings in our belief systems, put that separation, that wedge in there saying, oh, we're something different from where we came from. My God, it couldn't be anything further from the truth.
Yeah, right.
Excellent.
We definitely agree with you with that.
Yeah. What role do you think hypnagogic states play in things? They seem to be closely tied to Hat Man phenomena, old tag, and alien abductions. I see a lot of crossover there. Do you feel anything particular about hypnagogic states?
I think that this is just another tool that we can utilize. It'll have its own limitations to a certain extent, but within that, there's much to explore. There are many different interpretations and perceptions that we can hold. I mean, if nothing else, we can create a new one every day if we wanted to, but we'd all be still seeing the same thing. Whether you give it a label, whether you give it a name, most times this is just for the mind to compartmentalize it so they can understand it again within a linear sense. It needs to catalog certain things in order to comprehend it. That's just the way that we're programmed. Can we break out of that? Absolutely. But in order to do that, we will eventually start calling in that higher mind of ours and anchoring that in. Some people call it walk-ins, some people call it downloads, but this is a part of yourself that you are now reconnecting and remembering. And I say it just that same way, remembering, bringing it back together as the full entity. Because if we're not doing the work and doing this consciously, we're just floating about reality again, looking at life, saying that things happen to us. And we'll never get out of a state where we could just have taken responsibility, taken our power back and saying, we're much more powerful than what we think. And then allowing ourselves to explore those bigger aspects of ourselves to become more complete within this reality. When you pass on and you merge into those other, light bodies or whatever, that you're complete already. Again, we go back to knowing versus experience. And the reason you come into a physical body in the first place is to experience what you already know.
Excellent. Yes, our NDEs and people who have reincarnated often say that, right? That you choose the body, you choose the life before you live it, because you know what you're getting into, I guess. Well, that's fascinating. I like that because it's it's really good to take control of one's life in all ways, right? So there's another way of thinking about taking control of your life, rather than being just reactive to the things that are happening around you. You can do this on a spiritual level, maybe a dimensional level. Fascinating.
Absolutely.
Great stuff. So let our audience know, when is Dark Hour Paranormal on? How can people reach you and find you?
Well, I was supposed to be doing a show tonight, but unfortunately, the internet is being worked on at my house, so I can't do that until whenever they decide to turn it back on, hopefully within the next day. So we're moving things out to next week. I do have Brian Minnick from the Dark Files, Montauk is Strange, and several other programs that you can find him on mainstream media. He's coming on to talk about a dissertation that he had given today on the esoteric and enigmatic principles of Montauk and specifically Camp Hero, including the history of that particular site. Fascinating historian, very, very good friend of mine. But he will be on Thursday. We usually go at 11 o'clock p.m. Eastern time. And we have basically begun booking out the rest of July. We're going to have some fantastic guests that span over the course of topics such as wellness and health, Reiki healing and other modalities. We have sacred geometry folks coming on. Of course, I've got a whole host of paranormal teams that are expressing interest that will be showing up. I don't want to kind of back to back all of these paranormal teams. We kind of keep the variety. But you can find me over on Dark Hour Paranormal on YouTube. You can find me on Third Phase of Moon. You can find me occasionally over with Rich Giordano and Kufan. I also manage Dr. J Radio Live's channel, Art Bell's old producer. And of course, thanks to you, Chris and Kristen, I do have Michelle Freed working with me behind the scenes to help me on some of these bookings. So I appreciate that very much, and I thank you.
You're very welcome. We love Michelle. We've done a lot of things together, and we enjoy her. She's a wonderful person. So that's cool. It's cool. She's been a huge help to us. And
absolutely.
Glad to hear that. And I like that you're keeping a lot of variety in the show. You know, we try to do that as well.
Do that a lot.
We do a Thursday show, a Saturday show, and definitely with the Saturday, especially, we try to mix it up and do different things paranormal, so that it keeps it fresh and it gives different perspectives to the things you already like. So that's fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much again.
And
thank you. I really appreciate you having me on the show. I really enjoy what you both do, and look forward to getting together when we go out some of these locations together. By the way, I'll just mention very quickly, I do have Jared Murphy working with me all next week, folks. If you've been to my channel, you've seen him many times. He's a fantastic archaeologist, has written the book, It's Not Aliens, It's Us, and of course is, quite versed in many aspects of these fields. He'll be with me physically next week, going out to some of these archaeological sites out here in the Northeast, somewhat reflective of America's Stonehenge, wherein we just don't know exactly who built these and how many cultures have lived there, but we're finding that we have fire pits that have been dated back to 12,000 BC. So what the hell is that? So we're gonna look into this a little bit deeper, but definitely keep your eyes out for next week, because we'll be doing a few live shows as well as putting together some mini documentaries on that.
That sounds wonderful.
Excellent. We'll be tuning in.
We'll be watching that. Definitely.
Awesome. Well, thank you
so much.
Just stay with us. I'm gonna close out the show. I'll be right with you.
Sure.
All right, guys. So sorry, it's just an hour today, and we'll be back on Saturday night for Bigfoot and the Bunny, and of course back next Thursday. So stick around, stay tuned, and check out Dark Hour Paranormal on YouTube. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Have a great night.